Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown in China Rising Radio Sinoland, and I am extremely proud to have on as a guest today Mr. Mobo Gao, who I've been wanting to interview for a long time. Good morning, Mobo. How are you doing?
Good morning. We're good. It's good, fine. Thank you.
The reason I have Mobo on is I read two of his books. One is called The Battle for China's Past, Mao and the Cultural Revolution, and the other one is Gao Village, Rural Life in Modern China. And they were both such an incredible revelation to me, and such an eye-opener that I just had to have him on. So are you ready to get started, Mobo?
Yes, sure.
In both of your books, you lay out irrefutable statistics about China's incredible socioeconomic feats of production, expansion, and inclusion during the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution on the one hand, but you also show all the negative aspects of both revolutions. How do you explain this, amazing dichotomy, this bizarre cognitive dissonance, the highs and the lows and the progress and all the sacrifices? How do you explain that?
Well, it's like in every country, in every government state, when you implement the policies, there are consequences. You might have good intention for all counts, but sometimes the consequences might not be what you expected. That's in general. But in the case of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, there were good policies, but when they were implemented, and then some of them were carried to the extreme. Like, for instance, during the Cultural Revolution, you're supposed to criticize people and about the ideas, but sometimes, some people get so passionate or so silly, and they not just criticize in words, they start fighting and to beat people up. I mean, that's a fact. It's not good. And the same thing with the Great Leap Forward. The ideas of working on two legs instead of industries concentrated in urban sector, and Mao wanted to have some industries in the rural sector, so that there's no such a concentration and so on. The idea is great, but when you carry it out, you might go astray. The same with catching up industrialization with the West as fast as you can, and they wanted to produce more iron and steel, which is an indicator of industrialization. You need iron and steel to build, to start with, to build things. But then and then at the various levels they impose quota, and then when you can't fulfill the quota, they have to find ways to do that. And one of them is, as I described in my coverage, is take the utensils made of iron and steel and broke them up, and then use them as production. And also you use this local furnace and ask the rural people of the neighborhood to produce iron and steel. It's a great idea, but you can't just, not everybody can produce iron and steel. You can't just do it like that. So that.
Yeah. I just want to, first off, I'd like to tell our fans out there and guests across the world that you grew up in your book about Gao Village, you grew up in a very, very isolated, poor village in South Central China called Gao Village, and it's a fascinating read, and I'll put both of your books on my website, so encouraging people to read them. And I just wanted to ask you, just as sort of a philosophical question, do you think that because and people have to understand, they'll have to read your books. We don't have time to go through all the amazing things that happened during the Great Leap Forward in terms of industrialization and production and Cultural Revolution, the incredible expansion of education across the countryside, tens of thousands of schools being built and, tens of millions of children being educated. We don't have time to go into the numbers. But then you talk about all the problems, and I just wanted to ask, I mean, do you think this suggests that greatness and advancement can only be achieved by some kind of a Faustian trade-off where people have to suffer, for progress to happen? I mean, can progress be painless, or does it have to be painful?
That's a very good question. It's very hard to answer. Basically, I think the revolutions in some places in China or other places sometimes become inevitable. There's the oppression and the situation have become so bad, there's nothing that could stop them. Now, when there is revolution like the 1949 revolution, then there was violence. I mean, I teach this course at the university, and I ask students to think about these questions. Like, for instance, the land reform in China did a great deal of good for the people of all of China, especially the rural sector. But then, how do you mobilize the people to participate in the land reform and also to realize that this is a kind of thing that you have to take into your own hands as a master of your own destiny? That's what we're told about. So then they were told about the theory of class struggle, and then we're told that you're poor not because you have to be, or not because you are stupid, or not because your fate is no good, or you're not because your star sign is no good. It's just because there's a class system. If you break this class system, and you'll be as good as anybody else, which is basically a very, very ideal, very idealist and good. But then in order to do that, you have to show people how to do that. You have to struggle against landlords. You say, look, he was so powerful before, now he's nothing. To do that, then you victimize the landlord in terms of personal dignity. So that is something, it's in a way it's inevitable. In a way, but you see, if you look at Europe, they could talk about the British glorious revolution that was peaceful and so on. But look at the French Revolution, or look at the American Civil War.
Or the Russian Revolution.
Or the Russian Revolution, or even what is happening now. So it's just sometimes human beings make mistakes, and it looks like it's inevitable. You need, if you want to make some change, you need to be some radical and dramatic actions.
Yeah.
And when that, then the passion and also revenge and personal grievance and everything, it's very hard to be rational.
Yeah, exactly. I've been reading other people and listening to podcasts of people your age. You grew up as a child during the Great Leap Forward, and as a teenager during the Cultural Revolution, and they have a similar message. They really struggled. Some people really got hurt physically and mentally, and there was hunger in the Great Leap Forward, and suffering by people in areas where there was serious drought and low crop production. Yet they, like you, these same people, they talk almost nostalgically about the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, and that they're proud that they lived through it, and that they're thankful that they had that experience, and they feel good, and in spite of the mistakes that were made, they still have a lot of respect for Mao Zedong and Xi Jinping. He wrote eloquently. He did backbreaking work for 7 years, in an impoverished village in the Cultural Revolution. and he says that it made him helped make him the man that he is today. Do you feel that same way? I mean, what are your thoughts on this? And how can you relate to what these other people are saying?
Well, I can relate it quite well, except I grew up and I was born and grew up in a very poor village, and my parents very poor and everything. So for me, it was not really something extraordinary. It's just a way of life, and that was the kind of way of life for generations. Whereas for people like Xi Jinping, and he grew up in a very privileged house.
Yeah, very privileged. Yeah,
and certainly put into in a backward rural village. I mean, for him, it was even more extraordinary. It's even harder, I would think. So that you had to be supported by some spiritual sustains, which is the political passion, which is the kids under the education of Mao's ideas at that time thought you had to go through hardship to build up New China, and you have to work for the poor people. I mean, that's good. I mean, I give an example. For instance, nowadays it's material life is good and everything. I mean, you could say you never had so good in whole of Chinese history. But people are still resentful, and the security is problem. You can't. I mean, even sometimes you have to register when you buy a knife or something. I heard because they're afraid of security. Was if you look at in the era of Mao, real guns and with bullets were given to the people. And if they were so resentful of the authorities of the people that administrate them, that could be violent, but there wasn't violence. It was peaceful, it was nice, and because people have the idea of building a society together, and they don't mind going hardship, but they know life was hard and it should be hard. Like my parents, they never had a day of good life if you think of material life. And I grew up without knowing that I had been hungry all the time. I thought that was life. So it's the way you think, and that'll make a difference.
Yeah, I just want to let the people out there listening know that after 1949, the Chinese had to deal with the Korean War and the Taiwan, and the Americans and the CIA were sending in all kinds of
also the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and the Vietnam War, and there were all kinds of CIA, Taiwanese coming into China trying to subvert the place and overthrow the communist government. And so the government, I mean, rural people, especially on the coast, like near where you lived, were heavily armed, and yet during the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, there were never any outbreaks there was no uprising or anything. So, that strongly suggests that that in spite of the hardships, the people supported the ideals behind those two revolutions. I just read a really good book called The Communist Party of China's Capacity to Rule by Jinghan Zhang, and he suggests that it's possible that many of the negative effects of the Great Leap Forward could have been prevented if the Sino-Soviet split had not happened. And he didn't get into it because it was sort of a side comment, but I thought that was a really interesting question. And for the people out there who don't know, in 1960, up until 1960, the Soviet Union and China were working very, very closely together, and for a lot of reasons we don't have time to go into here, there was a big split, and it was called the Sino-Soviet split, and all the thousands of Russian technicians left the country. And it did cause China a lot of temporary hardships. Do you think it's possible that if the Sino-Soviet split had not happened, that many of the problems during the Great Leap Forward could have been mitigated, or is that just wild speculation?
well, this is the testament of the Great Leap Forward. It's still very controversial, and one of the things is about the Soviet Union, yes. But there are two things. One thing is that if they had if the good relationship between the two countries maintained, and certainly would have been better. Certainly, the fact that it breaks. I mean, the relation broke. It makes things worse. I think that's in general terms, I think that is acceptable. But if you come to the specifics, like the decline or of production of grain production in the rural sector, I don't think that's because of the Soviet Union or because of the break. On the other hand, however, the Soviet Union did ask. You mentioned the Korean War. The Korean War, the Chinese sent troops to fight the South Koreans and the Americans and the United Nations forces. But the Soviet Union did provide arms like fire jets and fighter jets and ammunition and so on and so forth. But then it was on the condition that the Chinese had to repay it. It's very interesting, and although not the whole price of what it was quoted, but half of it of the price on a discount, half price. It's 50% discount, but the Chinese still have to pay for it. Now, there was a large amount of money, and during the Gulf Revolution, that the Chinese during the Great Leap Forward, the Chinese leadership tried to negotiate with the Soviet Union because the China was in difficulty. So China had to actually borrow more from the Soviet Union to return the debt and interest. So in that sense, and the Chinese had nothing else to had no hard currencies to pay them, so they had to pay things in kind, and they're short of food. They can't, so they pay other things, like cotton or raw materials to pay them. So that certainly didn't make things better, if not worse.
I never knew that, Mobo. I never knew that about the debt and the payments to Russia. That's incredible. Wow.
Yep.
You have a colleague, friend of yours, I think you know, Dongping Hong, and I also read his book, which discusses his life in a rural village in China during the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And his village was not far from Qingdao, which is pretty big, medium-sized city, and in a much more densely populated area than yours. And you were really out in the boondocks, in Jiangxi and far away from any really major area. Major city, and his impressions of his life there were not as difficult as yours. I mean, he seemed to have. I mean, I don't want to disparage that he had a tough time, but you really seemed to be in a poorer and a more difficult circumstance than he was. And I just wanted to ask you, I mean, you both had floods and droughts and you both had hunger, but I just wanted to ask you, do you think that during the Great Leap Forward the amount of hardship, that there was a relationship between your proximity to bigger cities and versus being isolated like you were? I mean, do you think that people that live closer to bigger cities had a better chance of surviving the difficulties than people that were super isolated like you were?
That has always been the case, even today. The urban sector had a better way of life than the rural sector, and the rural sector that is near the urban sector has some advantage. I mean, one of the examples, for instance, they didn't have to grow all things. They could grow just vegetables and things that can be sold at the market in urban sector, they can make some money out of it. Whereas the remote villages like mine, a Gao village, they could never do that. It's very isolated. At the same time, the government does have control of these remote places because they have to contribute to the country. In other words, they have certain quotas of grain for consumption, and anything that is above that quota has to be sold to the state to feed the urban population. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So as I described in my book, Ka Village, the population in the village doubled, and then at the same time the urban population doubled. So the villager had to produce 4 times more grain to maintain the same living standards because of the population. So life was harder because of that. At the same time, technology, there was no technology breakthrough yet, because nowadays it's easy, because if you go to the villages, you can see the rural people, the farmers. They don't weed anymore. They just life is much easier because they just throw chemicals into the field. And the land is polluted, and out come the grains and the products are not of as good quality, but you still have abundant of them. People don't go hungry anymore. But in those days, that wasn't the case. There was no. And there was little chemical fertilizer, and you had to be rationed when I was in Ka Village. So you have to use organic fertilizer like night soil and so forth. It's good, but the production is limited. So that's been the case for generations, and so the land to people ratio is so precarious in China, has been so for a long time. So any slight tick of change, like weather, like a flood or drought, it's disastrous. So people don't realize that. People in a country like Australia, America don't know about this because you have so abundant natural resources and land.
Relative to the number of people. Exactly. Yeah, I wanted to point out to people who maybe don't know that during the Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1961, the year before the Great Leap Forward started, China had one of the best crops they ever had, and there was tremendous abundance. And then the following spring, when the crops were planted, there were massive floods, and then in the summer there were droughts, and the droughts went on for a couple of years of the Great Leap Forward, and it just devastated the agricultural production. And at the same time that they were trying to industrialize, and they did actually industrialize, they did incredible things, but the drought really and all the floods really hurt the crop production, and that's why there was that was the foundation for so much hunger during the Great Leap Forward. Moving on, Mobo, you are pretty bitter about the trajectory China took after Mao's death. You really lay into Deng Xiaoping's reforms and opening up, and all the problems and suffering it caused, and the loss of all the gains that rural China made during the Mao era. And you're not alone. Dongping Han was also equally scathing in his book about what happened after 1978. What would have happened if Hua Guofeng, Mao's chosen successor, after his death, had continued Mao's vision for New China, and Deng had not taken over the policies and the decision making in China? Where would China be today, and what do you think it would be like?
Well, that's a very good question. This is about human society. You can't do a lab test So in science, like physics and chemistry, you can do a lab test to find out. But in human society, you can't do a lab test, so it's very hard to say. You can only speculate. But a couple of things. One is I'm not against reform. I mean, I think any society needs to reform because you do something for some time, and then there's new circumstances and so on and so forth, and you need to have new policies. And you have to reflect, you have to review, and so on and so forth. So reform is fine. Now, secondly, it's not true that Mao in China in the year of Mao, China was isolated because Mao or the CCP wanted to isolate China or wanted to close China up to the outside world. It was the opposite. It was the outside world.
Oh, absolutely. The West just completely blockaded China technologically, financially, culturally. It was they did the same thing to China that they're still doing to Cuba.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So if you look at, for instance, I mean, there were the so-called overseas Chinese in Southeast Asian countries, and they have families and relatives back home, and some of them wanted to visit the China, and their government wouldn't allow them because they were saying this, evil communist system. If you go there, get brainwashed and so on and so forth. So it was not the China who didn't want to come; it was these governments who didn't want the citizens to go to China. So it's not that Deng Xiaoping opened up China and Mao didn't. It's just because of the Cold War and the sanctions against China. But in 1971, Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State of the United States of America, visited China secretly, and then in 1972, Nixon visited China. Mm-hmm. And then that was Mao, when Mao was still alive, right? And it was Mao's initiative, the ping pong diplomacy, to get the United States to come to China. So Mao wanted to open up China as well. It was just, and then because the United States relaxation of his policy to sanction China, other countries started to have a relation with China to establish diplomatic relations. Like Japan established diplomatic relation with China in 1971. So did Australia. And it was also in 1971 that China was accepted into the United Nations, and Taiwan was expelled. So China was already trying to open up, and during the time of Hua Guofeng, 10 big plants were imported from the West.
Yeah, fertilizer plants.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, fertilizer plants.
Huge, yeah.
And also to make synthetic fabrics for clothing. So it was already happening. That was before Deng Xiaoping came to power. So it's not that Deng Xiaoping alone who wanted to open up and reform. Everybody wanted to. So the China would adjust the policies anyway. That's the first point. Mm-hmm. The second point is that whether you would, to what extent, and open in what way. So the way that China went since the 1990s, it looks like it is China wanted to join the capitalist world, and in fact it did. Not just open up, but also join the capitalist world, and in many ways for a couple of decades, it was China who saved the capitalism. Now,
I think it probably still is.
And probably if Hua Guofeng were power, Hua Guofeng, I don't know whether he's the quality, leadership quality, but he might stick to the ideas that he thought it was Mao's. If Hua Guofeng was still in power, somebody else who was not like Deng Xiaoping, China could steer in a road that is not completely to be the side of capitalism. You can still open up China. You can still use foreign technology and capital. You can still uphold some socialist policies in China, but that didn't happen. And the people that suffered from the consequences, of course, were the working class
and the rural people to a great extent.
Rural people to a great extent, yes.
I wanted to ask you. A lot of people don't know that in the Chinese Constitution, it states that the Communist Party of China, its goal is to transition China to a purely communist economy and society. That's why the CPC exists, is to transition China into a purely communist society. Obviously, Mao tried that from 1949 to 1976 until he died. And do you think that China will ever be able to honor that commitment to transition to a purely communist society? Is that a possibility now that it's so wealthy and has a lot of money and technology and infrastructure, kind of going through the European, industrial phase, that Marx talked about? Do you think that China can become a purely communist society in the future, or is that just a pipe dream?
I don't know. I mean, what is communism? A communist society, from each according to one's ability, to each according to one's needs. That's the slogan, all right? The slogan that indicates the kind of society that is like, without money, without a commerce, without exploitation, and everybody works for the pleasure, not for a living. And you could paint in the morning, hunt in the afternoon, and everybody is equal, and you run things yourself. You don't need a boss above you, and so on and forth. That assumes lots of things. One of the things that is the material abundances. Material abundance, like water running off of a well. But as we know, even the well can be dry. There's no water that is running forever. So material abundance can never reach that extent, because the what is material needs is not intrinsic in human nature. Intrinsic in human nature, you want to be warm when it's cold. You want to be cool when it's hot. You need to have sex. You need to be fat. That's it. That's it. But anything else is artificial. Is constructed. So why do you need to drive a Ferrari to go to work or anywhere? Why do you need a LV bag to carry with you? It's not intrinsic of human value. But the thing is, so therefore, what is needed, what one needs is not something that can be taken granted as understood in those days. When Marx wrote his worked out his idea, although he himself didn't was clever enough not to say what the communism is like. So what communism is difficult, and also if anything, the current indication is that China has gone far enough into capitalism. It is very hard to reverse. I think Xi Jinping is trying to do something, at least to make some moderation. Whether he will succeed, I don't know, because the vested interests, people like the finance people, like the real estate, like there's a very powerful vested interest group in China who wanted to change China to the direction. And whether Xi Jinping can do that, I don't know.
Yeah, that's my last question, and you really brought it right to a head, Mobo. I'm actually writing a historical fiction called Red Letters: The Diaries of Xi Jinping, and I really so I spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours researching this guy, and and I just wanted to ask you, you're down in Adelaide, I'm here in Shenzhen, and I was in Beijing, and you're Chinese, and I'm Western, and so we're kind of, at opposite ends geographically and ancestrally. But, Your observations about Xi Jinping and what he means for China today and tomorrow, good and bad, up and down. What do you think of the guy?
I think the jury is still out. I think he has good of the people in his heart. I think he wants to do something. He does want to make people happy. He does think at least some of the ideas of Mao's were good, and he would like to have them. He was the first leader since the death of Mao who said you can't use the later 30 years to deny the first 30 years of the People's Republic of China.
Yeah. He's saying that the culture, the Mao era is just as important as the Deng era, basically.
That's exactly right. So not just important, but also made contributions to China and the people's life. You can't. I mean, I've been arguing all the time. The era Mao has built the foundation for the later economic takeoff, if there's such a thing. I still have lots of issues with whether there is a takeoff. I mean, if you look at like the motor industry, it's all foreign owned. I mean, Huawei is the only brand that is a good brand, but then so lots of things. The Chinese have been assembling things. They're not really making things. They have been assembling things, put things together to make low tech things for the whole world. But so it's the life is better, that's for sure. But with a huge cost. Look at the pollution and the environmental destruction. Now, I think Xi Jinping wants to correct that. Whether he can do that is very hard to say. And I don't think he himself at the moment has a very clear idea of the narrative of China. What is his vision of China in the future? He talks about the China's dreams of what? He only talks about the 小康社会, little prosperity. Little prosperity, it's like, I don't know, maybe say in Australia it's like average earning or income, like
sort of middle class, something like that.
40 to 50,000, are on a per capita income of US dollars, for instance. Now, it's at the moment Beijing is like even about 10,000. Right? So that kind of little prosperity, it's that he says. But how do you get there? How do you get there? What kind of means what kind of relationship means production? So you talk about using market economy to serve the state, but what about the state-owned enterprises? What about the rural farming sector? What about the land ownership? And you talk about productivity. Now, how do you have a large-scale production in rural China at the same time maintaining a collective ownership of land? Now, how do you do this? He hasn't got a clue. I don't think he has.
Yeah. Well, those are deep philosophical questions that have been asked for centuries, really, when you think about it. But at least going back as far as Marxism and owning the means of production, etc. Well, listen, Mobo, this has been a great interview. I've really appreciated having you on. We had a little bit of a struggle connecting, but we finally got connected, and I've loved having you on the show. I will put your two books on the on the article for this, and want to thank you so much for taking time to visit with me here on China Rising Radio Sinoland, and wish you all the best in Adelaide, and let's stay in touch.
Yes, sure. My pleasure. Anytime. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later, Mobo. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.